Brazil has already destroyed 8 currencies since its independence, and guess what? It is about to destroy another one. Everybody knows Brazil for its football and beautiful beaches. It must be a hell of a dream to live in Rio de Janeiro, to enjoy Copacabana. Oh wait, you just got robbed! The truth is that for most of its population, living in Brazil is like always swimming against the current, and most Brazilians are just drowning. Really, for most Brazilians, life is really unpleasant, full of crime, trash, and crime. And why does that happen? Well, because the economic climate in Brazil is so hostile to business that no one wants to invest here. And as people cannot make ends meet by creating value to others, they decide instead to extract from others. Wanna open a business? Well, you will need to pay for some licenses and your corporate tax is going to be pretty high, at around 35%, so our poor ministers here can have some lobsters for dinner. Wanna hire someone? Well, you have to pay taxes for that too. But if you think that Brazilians don't get any return for the taxes they pay, you are absolutely right. The Brazilian government is an expert when the subject is wasting resources and denying its population any real quality of life. But though things are already bad in the country of football, they are about to get worse. Much worse. You see, Brazil is about to go through the same thing as Turkey, which is crazy inflation. In case you don't know, things got pretty bad in Turkey over the past few years. Look at the inflation rate there. It reached 85% in 2022 and now it stands at 50% considering the last 12 months. Now, look at what happened to the Turkish lira. The dollar in Turkey went up by 500% since 2020. The Turkish currency was basically destroyed. People in Turkey lost all their purchasing power. And that happened because even though inflation was going up, Erdogan, the Turkish president, decided to not raise interest rates. And in case you don't know, interest rates are an essential tool to control inflation. Here's how it works. When inflation goes up, you raise interest rates. This way, less money circulates, making less pressure on prices, which brings inflation down. On the other hand, when inflation is controlled, you can lower interest rates, accelerating the economy. But for Erdogan, the Turkish president, it just doesn't work this way. For him, interest rates should never go up at all, no matter what. He even fired 3 central bankers who were trying to do their jobs by raising interest rates. And with that, people lost confidence in the Turkish lira, and well, everybody got poor. And why am I saying that Brazil will become the next Turkey? Because currency devaluation is what we are going to see here. That was already obvious, and now it's painfully obvious. You see, since Lula's administration began, government spending in Brazil has just exploded. The government is spending more money now than it was during the pandemic. But there is no pandemic. But this week something new happened. The government was going to announce a package of spending cuts to calm down the markets. But they also introduced a little surprise. According to the government, we'll have savings of around 70 billion reais by 2026. Great, right? Well, not so much. That's because just in the last 12 months, the government's deficit surpassed 1 trillion reais. So what difference do 70 billion in 2 years make? But as I've told you, the government also showed up with a little surprise. The government announced that everyone earning up to 5,000 reais, which today equals around $830, will be exempt from income tax. And of course, everybody's celebrating, right? And it's not that I'm not in favor of fewer taxes. Quite the contrary, actually. I'm indeed in favor of fewer taxes. The problem is that the government is already spending a lot, and now it has just announced that it will cut part of its own revenue, which puts Brazil on an even more unsustainable path of extremely high government deficit. Besides, the government also announced that it will fight against the evil rich. Enough with inequality, right? That's why the super rich here in Brazil will have to pay more taxes. Now, of course, rich people are not dumb, right? They got rich. That's why we'll probably start to see more rich people flying out from Brazil, which will lead to, guess what? Less private capital to be invested here in the country. Now, is it just my impression, or does this simply sound like a bad plan? Well, not if your plan is to make everyone equal, right? I mean, equally poor. Now, I challenge you to guess who will be considered super rich in Brazil. A billionaire, or maybe someone with a net worth of, let's say, $100 million? No, a super rich in Brazil is someone who earns more than $8,000 per month. $100,000 per year already qualifies you as a super rich in Brazil. That's pretty absurd. So, in summary, it seems that government spending in Brazil will keep rising even more, and that we'll continue to see capital flying out of the country. Well, what can I say? Brazil really seems to be following the path of progress. But let's not forget the most important thing in this story. With that move, Lula may have already secured the next election. For him or for his economy minister, Fernando Haddad, who was actually chosen by President Lula to present this spending cut package on national television. And of course, this announcement destroyed everyone's confidence in the government. No one is taking the Brazilian government seriously anymore. And as a consequence, the dollar rose 3% here in Brazil, reaching its all-time high, while the Brazilian stock market just plummeted. But wait, because there is more. As you can see, it's not a wild bet at all to say that the dollar will soar in Brazil, or in other words, that the Brazilian currency, the Brazilian real, will depreciate. But it gets worse. That's because soon the president of Brazil's central bank will be changed. Currently, the Central Bank of Brazil is run by this guy here, Roberto Campos Neto. But at the end of the year, Daniel Galípolo, who's been picked by the super populist President Lula, is set to take over. And Lula has said repeatedly that interest rates are just too high. It's almost a crime against the country to have such high interest rates. So my impression is that Lula will try to bring interest rates down by force through the new central bank's president, just like Erdogan did in Turkey, which in the end would accelerate the devaluation of the Brazilian currency, just like what happened in Turkey. So by combining the government's massive deficit with the likely interference in interest rates, we get an explosive result. So that's why I strongly believe that Brazil is on its way to becoming the next Turkey, the next Argentina, the next Venezuela, with a lot of inflation, with crazy inflation and much more poverty. And lastly, I grew up hearing that Brazil was the country of the future. Really, that was Brazil's slogan. But I grew up and this amazing future never came. In fact, it seems like things went the other way. It seems like things went backwards. So at this point, it seems like Brazil is an eternal promise. Brazil will forever be the country of the future, because it's definitely not the country of the present.